Mind Your Farm Business on RealAgriculture.com is brought to you by RBC Royal Bank.
Welcome to the Mind Your Farm Business podcast brought to you by RBC Royal Bank. I'm Shaun Haney, founder of RealAgriculture.com and host of Real Ag Radio on Rural Radio 147 Sirius XM. You can find more episodes of this podcast by going to mindyourfarmbusiness.com. Today's focus is on a pivotal aspect of farming, the right time and the right way to exit the business. Our guest is Renee Wiatt. Renee brings insights from Purdue University as a family business management specialist, addressing a common challenge. Are farmers waiting too long to transition, and how does this impact the next generation? We'll explore the complexities of transferring management roles and assets, highlighting that these are distinct processes that can significantly affect the transition success. Renee emphasizes the importance of early planning and open communication, vital for a smooth handover to the succeeding generation. Our discussion will touch on the emotional side of exiting. For many farmers, their identity is deeply linked to the land and the work, making stepping away a profound life change. Success stories and strategies are a key part of our conversation. Renee's going to share some effective practices and strategies for transitioning, like involving successors in key decisions and building relationships with essential partners. We'll also delve into the delicate issue of choosing a successor when the farm can't sustain multiple inheritors. This episode is more than business. It's about preserving the heart of farming, the family. Join us in exploring these crucial aspects with Renee Wiatt on the Mind Your Farm Business podcast. Renee, welcome to the Mind Your Farm Business podcast.
Thanks for having me, Shaun.
Okay, today we're going to talk about exiting the business in a timely manner. I guess, how do we define timely manner? It feels like that could be kind of self-interpreted what that actually really means.
It could be. And I think that a lot of farmers, when they think about exiting the business, I'm sure we've all heard, I'm going to die in the cab of the tractor. I'm going to die in the combine. But ideally, that's not what we want. We want to make sure that we're planning and preparing to pass the business on way before that happens. Yeah,
absolutely. So, okay, I guess in general, from a lot of your work at Purdue, working with family farm businesses really across the country, in general, is the farm entrepreneur, are they waiting too long to exit? Is this an issue?
So it's not so much that they're waiting too long to exit. It's that they're really delaying passing on management tasks to the next generation, and they're missing that opportunity to train up that next generation. So, there's a lot of different ways that farm owners can decide to exit the business or slowly transition themselves from, say, an owner to more of a consultant role. So they can stay involved in the business, they can keep farming, they can keep advising that next generation, but actually training up the competent next generation takes a long time. And I think that a lot of farmers hesitate to hand over those management decisions to the next generation.
Yeah, because there's a difference between, I guess, an operational exit versus the asset exit. And many times those things are put into one clump. And you're kind of making the exit a little bit more difficult in general, aren't you?
Yeah, you are. I mean, farms are so asset heavy. We're talking about land. Land is a very, very expensive asset, and farms often own a lot of land. And so when you are talking about exit, assets can be passed upon death, but management roles, that can take place during your lifetime and while everyone is still able to discuss things. And we've seen a lot of farm businesses that we've worked with. If the owner is able to take time to train the next generation, take time to learn what the next generation sees, what the next generation wants, and they're able to integrate that successor generation into the farm business and pass on a lot of knowledge, a lot of training, while also adhering to that farm's legacy and passing that down to the next generation as well.
Okay, that all makes sense. So for each individual entrepreneur, how do I identify, okay, this is the right time to exit? And what does that process kind of look like?
Sure. So we have some statistics on about how long it takes to do these succession processes based on what type of succession you're looking at, if that makes sense.
Yep.
So, if you're talking about an intra-family succession, so you're passing it on to someone in your family, that whole process takes about 6.5 years. So it takes a long time. If you transfer the business to employees, it's about 3.5 years. And even if you're outright liquidating and selling the business, that takes a year and a half. So these things, these processes in succession take a lot longer than you would think.
Yeah, I think there's no doubt to that. Now, across, the farms you've interacted with and some of the work that you've done at Purdue,
Mhm.
do you think there's a stigma to farmers, hitting that point where, hey, it is time for me to exit? Now, whether that's like sort of like self-determined or if that's maybe a forced situation, which can also happen. But is there a stigma to, because a lot of people don't think past the exit, right? It's sort of like I farm, I ranch, and like you said, I'm going to die in this combine. Is there a stigma to the exit?
I think that for a lot of farmers, their identity is so tied up in their farm that for them, they don't know what to do after they retire. So I could say for themselves, there is a stigma, but at the same time, there's a stigma for people who don't exit in time and where the community can kind of see that they need to exit and they haven't. And they're holding on and kind of, in a lot of cases, if they're not passing on those management responsibilities, they can be holding back their farm from its potential that it could have. They might be locked into the way it's always been done and not keeping up with technology or different conservation practices or all of these different things that farmers can now incorporate into their business and that can really hold their farm back.
Okay, so let's talk about some of the characteristics of, exit plans that are successful, because I think too many times in this topic we focus on the disasters, the train wrecks, so to speak. And hey, listen, they're out there, and there's a number of them.
Mm-hmm.
But what are the characteristics of successful exit plans?
So it all starts, I think, with communication and looking at the farm business as a whole. We like for farm businesses to evaluate where they are now, evaluate where they want to go, and what steps they need to take to get there to include the next generation. I mean, there's a lot of different processes that you have to think about when you're thinking about succession. You have to think about finances, you have to think about the marketing, you have to think, if you have employees, you have to think about human resource management. You have to think about landlord relationships. And all of this takes a lot of time to bring that next generation in and have them integrated in those conversations. But we've found the most success among farm family businesses when that incumbent or senior generation takes time to bring the successor in and go to meetings with their banker, to meet with their government agencies to say, okay, these are the programs that we enroll our farms in. This is why. What do you, as the successor, think we should do? These are our landlords. These are even our insurance agent. This is our combine dealer. Making sure there's time to build those relationships up over time and make them really integrated.
Yeah, I found it really interesting that, the market research arm of RealAgriculture, Real Agri Studies, we looked at, one of the very first things that farmers, are willing to delegate, so to speak, is like that seed purchase decision, right?
Mm-hmm.
But when it comes to, you mentioned meeting with the banker, when it comes to meeting with the banker, that's something that doesn't happen necessarily in some of those early years. And so when there's maybe an unplanned exit, like a death, for
Mm-hmm.
example, the younger generation is left holding the bag. They haven't flexed any of those muscles. They haven't experienced any of those discussions. And
Yeah.
those in today's world of how big some of the numbers have gotten, that's pretty important. So there's a lot of different transferring of skills here that need to happen. Even the most important ones, like sitting down with the banker or the insurance company.
Yeah, and we really encourage farms to be, there's three main things. We encourage farmers to be transparent with the next generation about what's going on. I know it's very hard a lot of times to show, open up your deck and show all the different assets that you have, where they are, how they're managed, and things like that. But we really encourage incumbents to be open with their successor about that. We also encourage, we've worked with a lot of farm families where we tell them, take 1 year and document what you do. Each season, each month, write a job description for yourself. And, a lot of owners, they're like, oh, I've been farming 40 years. I don't need a job description. We're like, yeah, you don't probably, what to do. But what were to happen if you were to get sick, where you're in the hospital for a month and they can't ask you, what do I need to do? Who does the maintenance? Who does this? What do we do? How do we get ready? Who's the guy at our local co-op that we buy our fertilizer from? Who do we need to contact? Things like that. So we, part of that is coming up with a job description and really having a good documentation of what everybody does on the farm so nothing gets missed. And another thing is a contingency plan. Just having a plan for who to call, what to do, what needs to get done. And that job description kind of dovetails into that contingency plan. So we have at least something to go to if something happens.
Yeah, I saw, I guess, a meme one time where it was like, on this farm, we talk about everything except for money.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's, I think a lot of us grew up on farms like that. Now, can the farming entrepreneur exit for the wrong reasons?
They can. I think so. We've seen in farms, we're talking about family businesses, right? I mean, 97% of farms in the US are family businesses. It's hard sometimes to manage those family relationships with the business relationships. Sometimes we've seen people exit the farm because they want to maintain those family relationships. And in other cases, we've seen some siblings or family members kind of pushed out of the family farm, and that can actually ruin those relationships. So there's a lot of moving parts when we think about those two entities and how they interact. Ideally, we don't want to exit because of bankruptcy, obviously, or anything like that. We don't want to exit because we've got such damaged relationships we can't work with our family anymore. That's not ideal. I mean, there's a lot of different ways we can exit and a lot of different reasons we can, but most farmers, if they can at all, they're going to hold on to that farm and that legacy and try to pass it on.
We'll get back to the Mind Your Farm Business podcast, but first a word from our sponsor, RBC Royal Bank.
This episode of Mind Your Farm Business podcast is brought to you by RBC. No matter where you're at in your agricultural career, succession has probably crossed your mind. Whether you have an idea to help the next generation thrive or just want to get a head start, RBC can help tailor a succession plan for you. Ensure that ownership of your operation, as well as your skills and knowledge, are easily passed on. Visit rbc.com/succession to learn more.
Yeah, I have described it before like this. There's the overlap years, and I've referred to them as kind of the golden years, where older generation, younger generation, there's this transferring of skill period where they're partners. Like I think a lot of times what happens is the exit is like, today I own all of it, tomorrow you do. And it's like, it has to be like this abrupt sort of thing. And I think there's like this period where there's an overlap where partnership, and then there's that true kind of learning because you're partners and you're kind of, it's really a different sort of scenario. And I think a lot of farmers kind of bypass that really cool step that allows you to really transfer a lot of that knowledge. It just talk about that. Is that something that you think could happen a lot more?
Oh, definitely. Yeah, I think that incumbents often don't want to train the next generation because that means that they're kind of letting go of some, right? They're letting go of some of their control over that business. And so, but that training period, like you call it, is crucial. I mean, not only are you motivating that next generation and saying, this is why I've done this all these years, this is how I got the farm, this is how I've been running the farm, the legacy and the history behind it, but bringing them in, letting them know all of that, and also letting them take the reins a little bit and adapt and learn under your supervision. Let them make a few mistakes, let them take over a little bit while you're there to help advise them. That way it's not an abrupt end. This is my end, you take over, you deal with all the decision making and all the consequences. I think those golden years, as you say, are critical in farm transition.
Yeah, and I think of a discussion that I had with a farmer. It was a couple weeks ago. It was a Costco. Or that's where you have all you run into people that you know. And I ran into this farmer. He says, "Yeah, well, I'm retired, and I've got a substantial farm, multiple families." And
Hmm.
he said, "Yeah, I'm sure you heard I retired." And he's not necessarily somebody I would consider like old. He's still very very active and doing a lot of traveling with his wife and those kinds of things. But he said, "I'm retired." And I said, "Oh, okay. What are you gonna do? Like, what's on the docket? Like, what do you got planned?" He's like, "Well, no, I'm honestly, Shaun, I am really looking forward to just being the planter operator, being the
Hmm.
combine driver, and if they need me to help with any decisions, I'm all there and I will provide my opinion. But I'm looking forward to just watching the next generation grow this thing and succeed and make it, better than me and my brothers ever did." I was like, wow, if only like that one, that's a phenomenal
Yeah,
attitude. Like that is like good on him because there's this, like you mentioned, control. There's this that's a release of it and just letting go and getting back to why you came back to the farm in the first place for the right reasons, which was you like farming.
right. Yeah, I think it's great if that incumbent generation can exit like that and then be that kind of advisor if they need it, but just providing manual labor to the farm and still being involved. I think that's great. That's
Yeah.
quite a rare occurrence, I would say, but that would
Yeah.
be an ideal situation.
That's why it stuck out to me as well. Now, I was reading
Hmm.
a story that you co-authored and what about exits, and one of the things that you talked about was, okay, so I've decided as the incumbent, as you've called it, I've decided that you know what, I'm getting ready. We need to plan for this, and like you mentioned, 6.5 years. We got to plan ahead here. There's one
Hmm.
problem. I've got two, let's make up a scenario. I've got two kids.
Hmm.
This farm is not big enough for two people to sustain. It's not that big of a farm. We either got to really expand and go hard, or
Hmm.
we need to kind of have a really tough discussion, and I've got to decide on, who I see as that successor. Oh, that's a tough one. And that scenario has avoidance written all over it.
Oh yeah. And putting off critical conversations. I mean, we have freshmen and sophomore undergraduates on campus all the time, and we say, what's the next step for you? Where are you going? They said, well, I'm going back to the farm, I'm going to manage it. We're like, okay, how old are your parents? Well, 50. We're like, okay, do you think they're ready to exit the farm? And then they just sit back and think, oh, crap. I don't think they are ready to exit. But having those critical conversations along the way is really important. And it is hard sometimes when you have to decide who is going to be able to take over that farm and what does that look like. You have to look at who is willing and able to join. You have to look at what trainings they've had. We have seen farms to go into another niche and open another part of the business.
Yeah.
Maybe they'll start a trucking branch under a different branch of the farm and things like that. But farms aren't always able to expand, and those are very, very hard situations. But the fact of the matter is, there's not always room for everybody who wants to be involved. So that's where those off-farm jobs or having, part-time people at the farm is going to come come and be really important.
I mentioned earlier the disasters. Do you
Hmm.
think that are we starting to see less of that? Like, are we seeing more successes, people going through this exit process, not perfectly, there's no perfect scenario, but more correctly to enhance the probability that it is successful?
Um, it's really hard to say, to be
Yeah.
honest. I like to think that there are. I mean, I think that this successor generation that's coming up is more verbal in a lot of ways and a lot more pushy to say, this is what I want, this is what we need to do, and kind of pushing that incumbent generation forward. And I think that will make some more plans happen and some more successful turnovers happen in farms within the family. But it's really hard to say. Farmers don't tell you everything when you talk to
Yeah.
them.
Yeah, well, it's interesting. I think back to at Real Agri Studies, we did a succession farm transition study going back
Hmm.
9 months ago. And the older generation, the biggest barrier to the transition happening was
Hmm.
financial. It was like taxes and things like that.
Right.
The younger generation, the biggest barrier to that transition happening was communication.
Mm.
Those are
Yes.
two separate worlds, right?
They are. Yeah.
And so in it really takes multiple generations to understand where the other generation's coming from to allow an exit process to go as smoothly as possible because it can get off the rails fast.
Yeah, it definitely can. Um, yeah, we did actually a recent study earlier this year, and we asked farmers, you inherited the business from a family member. They said yes. We said, how successful did you perceive that transfer? Thankfully, 78% said successful,
Hmm.
but that other 22% were unsuccessful or unsure for some reason. But they're the ones, they actually have the farm, right? They inherited the farm. They have the farm, and they still say the process was unsuccessful. And we said, okay, why is that so? And they said the process wasn't what I expected. The timeline wasn't what I expected. The people involved weren't what I expected. So I think that's kind of telling and eye-opening. But yeah, those processes take time, and it's hard to see what each generation needs. And that's why that communication piece is critical.
Yeah, this is an important topic. Exiting the farm business or farm transition, trying to make it go as smoothly as possible. We want to keep as many. There's the business side of it, but there's also the family component and keep families together and still be a family when the process is over. That definitely needs to be one of the
Right.
targets. And we'll keep talking about this topic. Renee, thanks so much for joining us here today on the Mind Your Farm Business podcast.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for tuning in for today's episode of the Mind Your Farm Business podcast. Our conversation with Renee Wiatt has been truly insightful. She offered a deeper understanding of the nuances, and there's so many, involved in exiting a farm business. As Renee profoundly stated, the true art of farming is not just in nurturing the land, but in successfully passing it on. This quote beautifully encapsulates the essence of today's discussion. We delved into the importance of early and strategic planning, clear communication, and the involvement of the next generation in farm operations. Renee's expertise highlighted that transitioning a farm is as much about handing over responsibilities as it is about preserving legacies and adapting to new visions. As we conclude, remember that a well-planned and executed farm exit strategy benefits not just the family involved, but also serves as an inspiring example of the wider farming community. It can be done. It's about ensuring the longevity and prosperity of our farming heritage and legacies. We hope today's episode has provided valuable insights and guidance for those approaching this significant milestone and going through this. I know a lot of you are. Thank you for listening. And don't miss our next episode of the Mind Your Farm Business podcast, where we'll continue to explore essential topics in farm management and discussion. If there's anything you want to talk about that Renee mentioned today, we'd love to hear some of your stories or some of your thoughts. You can send me an email, shaney@realagriculture.com. Or, of course, you can call the Real Ag feedback line, 855-776-6147. You can find more episodes of the Mind Your Farm Business podcast by going to mindyourfarmbusiness.com or wherever you get your podcasts. Thanks to RBC Royal Bank. And until next time, keep on minding your farm business.